Peter Zogas is here from Autodesk. He's a product content strategist, and he's going to talk to us more about cross-functional collaboration. So, everyone, please give the warmest of welcome to Peter.
Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate you coming out. I know it's been a really busy day. That you save time for content strategy is really heartwarming to me. Is anybody here a content strategist or works with content primarily? Okay, I can mostly make things up. We'll see. Yeah, I'm Peter. I work at Autodesk. I actually build construction software and work with design teams there. I'm going to talk about what content strategy is. It is the cross-functional part of the day, so I thought it'd be good to start out with kind of explaining what I'm doing here because I'm not a designer. And all I'm really trying to do is make content strategy more approachable for you. I'm trying to make it less of a scary thing and more something that you can sort of incorporate into the design work that you're already doing. So that's my main takeaway, and I appreciate you all coming to hear more about that. So what I'm going to do today is define content strategy in a way that makes sense to me. And I'm going to define it, again, in a way that I think is going to help make it approachable. Because if we do that, I think I can find some ways to help you add that type of thinking into your existing processes as designers, right? And then finally, because I know it's a big topic today generally, and for people who just use Figma, they're very interested in design systems, I want to talk a little bit about how you can make space for content in your design system. So defining content strategy. I started working not as a content strategist. I didn't know what that was. I was a content specialist the first time I was hired at a tech company, and I sort of slowly figured out that content strategy was something that I was doing. I feel like content strategy has a lot of anxiety around self-definition, right? We don't write the code, we don't do the designs, we just kind of, I don't know, write things, and there's a fair amount of justification that goes on. So if you look at a lot of the really early definitions of content strategy, it kind of abstracted things a bit, and it focused a lot on like process, scaling, and management. So how do we get from like one person creating stuff, creating content, to multiple people using a similar set of practices to create consistent content? How do we scale that up? And then how do we manage it, right? How do we keep control of everything that we're creating, whether it's in code or whether it's in databases? How do we keep it from growing unruly and kind of turning on us? And this is like, it's true, content strategists do this stuff, but if you kind of look at the landscape today, a lot of what content strategy is being asked to do is much closer to the design process. It has a lot more to do with UX writing and microcopy and information architecture, style, voice, tone, things like that. So this is why I just want to kind of shift things a little bit and tell you that I think of content strategy much more as a lens. And a lens is just a way of focusing your attention in a particular way. So I think of content strategy as a set of practices to focus your attention on how language drives user experience. And my hope is if you think about it in this way, it becomes a lot easier to apply it to the design processes that you already have. So what does it look like to kind of put design into the lens of content strategy? I just want to talk about some kind of approaches to do this, or some ways to make it a little more concrete. So basically, how do we shift our perspective a little bit toward how language is driving user experience? The first way to do this that I find really helpful is to reorient your thinking from reading toward information gathering, right? Our users of products tend not to be reading, but that doesn't mean they're not paying very close attention to the language that we're using, right? So when I say they're not reading, what I mean is they're not working linearly. They're not working left to right. They're not working top to bottom. They're skipping things when it's convenient to them. They're information gathering, right? They're paying close attention, but they're paying attention in a particular way. They're looking for certain words. They're leaving things out. They're moving around the page in ways that maybe we can't anticipate directly. So this is a way of reframing it a little bit, and hopefully it kind of fits with your design thinking, which is all fine and good, but like you need a way to put this to use somehow. So let me give a couple of examples of what that might look like. This is a pretty simple confirmation modal. I'm just going to show you some examples. They're pretty simplified, but you can kind of imagine how you could pull them into your own products or work that you're building. So yeah, simple confirmation modal. Do you want to invite a user? Kind of what's going to happen. Then you have body text. By inviting a user, they'll gain full access to the project and associated documents. Right? So this is the consequences of the action. And then we have a confirmation button, OK, and cancel. And it's pretty good. Like, this makes sense. You do have to kind of work linearly with it, though. You have to move left to right and top to bottom. The main action that we're conveying is invite, and it's sort of buried a little bit in the header. We have a sentence structure that is a dependent clause with a piece of punctuation and an independent clause. It's a little bit complicated. It's not crazy, but if you're just glancing at it, it's hard to put together really quickly. So if we think more in terms of information gathering, it can lead us to approach the language in a way that might help the user succeed a little bit more. So we would end up with something like this. Invite new user. This will provide full access to the project. And then we have the same buttons, except now the OK has become invite. We have a verb, which is like the primary thing that this modal is confirming, leading right off. We've simplified the sentence structure here. It still says the same thing, but we've just made it much more simple and easy to grasp sort of as you look at it immediately. And the one thing that I try to focus on is sort of drawing visual parallels or visual repetition. So we have the verb invite, which is like what the whole point of this thing is, mirrored in the button copy that you're doing. So if you think of a user just glancing at this and not working through it linearly, it's much easier to sort of grasp right away. Another thing I see a lot, I see this on websites a lot. This is a product I made up, new design, just a set of value props, like very common on websites. Instant cloud-based functionality makes access simple. You have unparalleled visibility into your entire design process, now with Busy HQ, which gives your team greater productivity. So again, like, it makes sense as we read through it, like, it works. But what I would want you to notice is that the sentence structure changes each time, right? At first, we begin with a noun and kind of explain something about it. Second bullet point, you are now involved somehow, like we have a pronoun, you're implicated. Third one, we have a subordinate clause. Again, we have some punctuation. It all makes sense, but they're different. And to somebody with a writing background or an editing background, on something where you're trying to convey a lot of information like this very quickly, changing sentence structure like that is like, for designers, if you were to use, create the same type of screen, but be switching from your primary to your secondary button. It just like would drive you crazy. So again, if we think in terms of information gathering, we get that. Again, it's saying the same thing, but we've restructured things. So now your bullet points, your value props are enjoy instant cloud-based access, gain unparalleled visibility into your entire design process, and experience greater productivity with Busy HQ. We're just leading with strong verbs. We've simplified the sentence structure, and we've made them all parallel. And it just reduces the cognitive load on your user and allows them to understand things a little bit more clearly. So that's what I mean by just like, I think these are things you're already doing, right? You're thinking of the way your user is experiencing each of the screens, but you can apply that same type of thinking to your writing and really gain a lot for your user. This next one is probably not going to be the most popular thing I say, but this is lorem ipsum. Everybody's here is probably familiar with this. Dummy text, been used for a long time. The thing I would say about lorem ipsum is that you should never use it. It's really, really bad. And the reason for that is, like, it locks you into this model of thinking that you have like the ideal copy, right? You create a beautiful visual design, you block off where you want the text to be, you lorem ipsum that text, and you know in your head it's perfect and it's communicating exactly what you want in the exact right amount of space. And it just never works out like that, right? You're just kicking the can down the road. What you do, like, if you use lorem ipsum, what you're preventing yourself from doing is seeing where, when you try to communicate something, it's actually going to break your visual design. So you have to approach a solution which will kind of mirror your visual design with the language that you're using, right? It basically prevents you from seeing all the problems that you're going to have, and then at the end of the process, you have to fix everything, and you end up with subpar copy that you really don't like. So some solutions here, like how to avoid this. It's going to sound like more work, but I promise you it's going to save time in the end. Start early. I'm a little cut off there. Sorry about that. Start early. Write your copy from the very first designs and make it terrible, right? Like first versions of anything are going to be awful, and people get fixated on this like, oh no, the words need to be perfect and I never want to go back to them. It just doesn't work like that. Write a first draft, make it awful, and it's going to allow you to see different things, right? It's going to allow you to see that maybe here you want to communicate two different things, so you should separate them to give the eye some space, right? You might realize that you're breaking a line where you don't want to be breaking a line, and you want to get it up to one line, right? You're going to see where you can work with your visuals and your language together to kind of solve a problem, and it allows you to iterate over time, right? It's the same thing you're already doing with your designs, but you can kind of layer in your thinking about the copy that you're using there and create a much better outcome. The other thing I really focus on, and I do this with designers all the time, I try not to deliver just one set of copy to them when they're looking for help on designs. I always try to give options. And there's a couple of reasons for that. If you give yourself options, one, you get over this like problem of thinking that you have to do it once and it has to be right, right? It's not going to be perfect like that. If you give yourself options, you can see different approaches to it. You can begin to identify what you like and what you don't like, and it gives you a way into sort of improving things over time. You know, you would never create just one mock for a design, right? And yet I see a lot of designers trying to just like write one set of copy, and it's just the same thing. You can approach it the same way. The other reason I really like giving options is that it's really hard to develop a vocabulary with your team about what you like and what you don't like about writing that appears in your product. A lot of us have a hard time talking about that. If you have options, you can begin to compare, comment on them, share them with your colleagues, and begin to develop a vocabulary for talking about these things that leads you in the right direction. All right, so start early, give yourself options. It's my best advice that I can give you in the span of 20 minutes. Again, just content strategy is a lens. It's a way to focus your attention. It's not something like in a silo somewhere else that is a totally different set of practices. It's just a sort of another layer that you can add to your existing design processes. And I think it can, you know, the more you do it over time, the better it's going to get. So, and I think this approach is really very useful for teams of, you know, maybe you're on a team of 3 designers or 5 designers and you want to pay more attention to this, but you don't have the resources for a dedicated role. This is a way to start kind of working on that. All right. Content strategy for design systems. Kind of changing gears a little bit here, but I kind of take a pretty similar approach, which is like, let's move content strategy much closer to the design process, right? Like, let's not get it off to the side and have it be a separate thing kind of commenting from the wing. Let's really integrate it. Because I like defining things, it's going to help me to start talking about this by mentioning a couple of different words. So when we start talking about this stuff, we have style guides, pattern libraries, and design systems, and they can sometimes get used interchangeably. A style guide means something very different to somebody coming from a publishing or an editing background. It's like the big book that sits on your desk that tells you, like, does the comma go inside or outside the quotation mark, right? Like really nitty gritty stuff like that. This is the Chicago Manual of Style. Maybe you had to use it in college. Tricky anomalies of the plural. You know, it's like pretty detailed stuff like that. But that's different than the way designers use it, you know, which, you know, deals with things like, okay, your style guide might have color gradients or kerning or things like that. So just know that when content strategists are talking about design style guides, excuse me, they're talking about these guidelines for grammar and punctuation, mechanics, style, and tone. And my view of the whole thing is that designers should never have to wade into that stuff, right? That what we should do is be making the things that are relevant to designers easily accessible within the design systems that you're already engaging with, right? So to kind of separate out like what's most relevant to people who are dealing primarily with the content and who can do those checks on grammar and mechanics and things like that, and the people who are more engaged with the design system work. So really what I have to say about design systems is more of a plea, and that's make some space for content there. And this is going to look very different depending on your product, your team, your organization, the things that you're going to be focusing on. The way I think about it is I try to think of, okay, what are the things that are very easy to overlook when we're creating components? And what is likely to be a decision that a designer is going to make again and again and again, maybe in different ways. And I try to focus on those two things to hone in on exactly what we should be looking for. And these are some common things that I think are useful to start bringing into your design systems. End punctuation. When do you use it? You know, that stuff I see it in products all the time. It's just kind of random. UI language like okay, okay, okay. Localization, date formats, title and sentence case, whether we're using pronouns, abbreviations, like whether or not you include all this stuff in your design systems is up to you. But these are the type of things that I find are overlooked. And then because of that, a designer working on a component makes a call in the moment, and it happens differently every time. So just a couple pieces of advice here. Just make space for the copy guidelines. It's pretty straightforward advice. You know, if you're documenting something like empty states, you might have illustration guidelines, you might have all your visual guidelines, but you also want to be thinking about how much text can I actually use on a screen? How much text can that be on web versus mobile, right? Is there going to be a title and a subhead? Okay, you probably lay that out in a design system, but then what should the messaging actually accomplish? And if you have designers taking a first pass on creating these, when the copy guidelines are simplified and live with the rest of the component, it just makes their lives easier. And that's, I think, kind of the goal here. The other kind of piece of advice I have around this is to get more comfortable with glossaries, which I know are not a lot of fun. Like they end up being these long tables and wikis and things and just listing language, but they can help you a lot. You know, if you think about all the different words you use to get things into your systems, you can add something, you can create it, you can use a new button. Like when do you use each of those? Again, it's something that designers may make different decisions on every time they encounter it. And what you want to do is kind of work to eliminate that guesswork or that kind of variation. I have export and download as two good examples here. Export, download, share. When are you using them? It's very easy when you have multiple designers working on a single product to have like different aspects of the product using this different language. So what I would say about glossaries is they don't have to be perfect. Mostly perfect is great. As long as you're using it, you're consistently returning to it. And if you're carving out space in your design system council or your conversations with other designers about how to build your design systems, just take some time to get on the same page about how you're using this stuff and put it down and use it, return to it over time. Because again, I really think that pulling some of these copy guidelines in, some of these content guidelines is just going to make life easier for your designers. I've written more about content strategy for design systems on Figma's really great designsystems.com website, which you haven't checked out. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. There's a lot of really great stuff there. So there's plenty more to say about that, but that's about time for me. I really appreciate you coming out. Happy to talk more about any of this. Thank you.